It's Saturday, and since I just nearly ran over a cat, I thought that perhaps this would be the perfect time to make one of these kind of videos. Honestly, I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to talk about, and perhaps again, perhaps, who sang that? I don't know. Maybe it's not the correct time in which to make a video. I'm finding recently there are so many videos I've said that I'll make. I have been tagged again by Emily of Novel Novels, and I know a few other people have been kind. Well, Emily's kind, but have chosen not to tag me because that was all my channel became for a few weeks there. But I had the Hilary Mantel video that I said I was going to make, and now I've read some non-fiction, and that's raised another question in my head that I want to have a discussion about. Perhaps I could have this discussion here. So, historical fiction, non-fiction. If you're writing historical fiction based on real events with real people, is that not just another form of non-fiction? Or is non-fiction technically not a form of fiction, since although we are reporting the events within non-fiction, we still have to write them in a way that is going to engage the reader. Therefore, are we not fictionalizing it in some way? Or does it all come back to storytelling? That was my question. Because looking at the Thomas Cromwell trilogy written by Hilary Mantel, we can never say for certain whether the dialogue that is in there is dialogue that actually happened at the time. We'll never know. We can look at all the historical sources, and I'm aware that Mantel included a character that Cromwell never met before in there for some dramatic tension. But that's where my question is. When it comes to history in particular, as opposed to non-fiction, when it comes to history with real historical characters, where's the line? There is a blurring of the lines for me, because the way that we report history is all about getting a certain reaction from a reader. The writer is bringing their own biases along with them. Therefore, they're never going to be reporting it subjectively. And certain writers are, when writing historical non-fiction, are going to decide some sources and some pieces are unimportant to the narrative that they want to tell, and they're going to focus on a different aspect of that history based on their own thoughts and opinions and the way that they live their lives themselves. And yes, this did all come about by reading How to Survive a Plague by David France, which is about how activists and scientists help to quell the AIDS epidemic and the fighting that took place. And I don't think I have ever read a book that was more apt during the times that we are in, and for the fact that it was Pride Month, and especially after a video I saw earlier in the week. It just happened to be a coincidence that I was reading this book at the same time as folk began to question again why Pride Month was necessary. And this book is one of those that just solidifies it, and I think should be read by a lot of people, although it is incredibly hard going. It took me a few weeks to read and listen to. I finally finally brought my Bluetooth speaker into the car with me. This was a charity shop purchase, and I don't know why I've never thought about it before. I'd gone through all the CDs in my car, and they've currently got a set of temporary traffic lights on my route in, and it's adding about 20 to 30 minutes to my journey because of how long the traffic gets backed up 4 different ways. And so one day I thought, why don't you just take this in the car? And I've been listening to audiobooks on this, admittedly just the David France one at the moment. But then, as is always the case with me, I question, well, why haven't I done that before? I could have been doing that for months rather than just accepting, you had an idea now, Charlie, just run with it. You can now listen to books in your car and forget that you ever could have done so before. It also means that I can listen to audiobooks again because I have no headphones for my phone. I bought some Bluetooth ones, but they just sounded tinny because they were too cheap, and I really need to upgrade my phone, but then that's another expense, and I just... oof. I don't know. If you fancy buying any of my books... oh, I've not put the links in the description in a while. I might put links in the description, I don't know. It just felt a bit self-aggrandising to do that. I don't even think that's the word, but hey. This has been a funny old week. Simply due to bloody pain. Well, I don't know what happened. As we all know, I have various issues with the bones in my body. The bone in my hip didn't solidify when I was younger, until very late as a child, just before I was a teenager actually. And I know that I mentioned this last year, but it gets somewhere. So a few years ago, I was at work and I lifted a box and there was a very loud crack, and I couldn't walk for a few minutes. Never found out what happened, but afterwards I found it very difficult to walk, went to physio, was told that I had hypermobile joints. Well, hypermobile hips in any case. And did the physio, got rid of the pain, but sometimes it reoccurs, as is wont to happen. A few years down the line, my knees start to go. Discover that the bone in my right knee was wearing away, but apparently there was enough cartilage there. So for about 5 years now, I've had constant pain in my knees. It's fine, I can cope with it, it's there. Avoid the painkillers because of reasons, and just manage. It got into my wrist last year. I remember saying that because I was looking for pens with thicker grips. Then earlier this week, I don't know why. Well, actually, no. I've had some times where it's been worse, but on Wednesday this week, could not move at all. Every single bone in my body hurt. I have never experienced that before. Well, no, I haven't experienced that in a rather long time, and because it had been such a long time, I had absolutely no idea how to deal with it, apart from to just stay in the one spot, not moving, so as to avoid any pain at all. I thought it was just the weather, because it started raining, and I thought, other people have said in the past that with any sort of like arthritic stuff, which apparently I have in my knee, I thought, it's fine, it's just that. Thursday comes round, still painful, but able to actually move a bit. Come into work yesterday, develop a new symptom, which has never happened before. I start popping. Like, joints just start popping. I mean, whatever this thing here is, the bone, popping, back, popping. I tell you, I didn't know I was going to drive home. Foot on that accelerator, most pain. But I did. And luckily my mum had started tea when I got in. I finished it, but It was kind of her. And don't worry, I don't say this in the hopes of perhaps garnering any sort of sympathy. It's something that's been there for a while, but it just makes me feel like I have to return to the doctor. And something that I have developed is this aversion to actually visiting the doctor. It's how 2 years ago I ended up with laryngitis and tonsillitis and a blooming chest infection because I avoided going to the doctors for so long. But it's one of those things where I end up thinking that I've had the pain for a while and eventually it usually goes away. And if I go to visit a doctor, which at the moment, the way things are backed up, it would probably be another month before I could get there. I know that despite losing a considerable amount of weight, they're still going to mention it. And it's very difficult to get them to do anything. And also, the resources are stretched so thin that it just seems unfair for me to go when I've had pain for a while and it'll either sort itself out or it'll continue. They could throw more painkillers at me. I already had the physio, so I know the exercises to do there. Or they'll x-ray me bones again and they'll say, sorry Charlie, they've worn away further. It's like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I know you're probably there thinking, just go to the flaming doctor, Charlie. It's honestly not that big a deal. But hey, this is who I am. I finally read a book by Rachel Cusk this week. It's called Arlington Park. And I keep thinking that if you are like me and you enjoyed Motherland, then you will like this book. It's not a comedy. It's just a series of, well, it's a novel, but each chapter follows a different character. And according to something I read on Wikipedia, it's something akin to a retelling of Mrs. Dalloway, which did not surprise me because whilst I was reading it, I found myself reminded of that book. So, yeah, if you're a fan of Motherland, if you're a fan of Virginia Woolf, then this might be for you. It was certainly for me. Very pleased to have read Rachel Cusk and already downloaded another book on the library app to read, but I can't remember what that one was called. Sorry, I keep looking away because there are so many tiny flies milling about my car at the moment. I don't think I'm going to get to all the books that I wanted to read this month. I do not believe that that is possible due to the fact that there aren't many days left in the month, and I have not read that many, but I don't mind. I will still go through the TBR that I gave at the start of June and just run that through into July. Again, it's just because I've added so much to my life that I don't find as much time for reading as I used to. I am still working at the final Doris book. I hopefully should be finished within the next 20,000 words, and I won't deny it does not feel it will not feel complete when I sign off when I write that final line onto my computer. It is not going to feel finished until I go back and I edit that first part and change it around a lot. Originally, when I thought about changing this first part of the Final Doris book around, I thought that I would move the third chapter into the second chapter because I thought it made a great inciting incident. However, I realised that adding more of a mystery element from this thing as to how the inciting incident occurred, removing a certain portion of the first part and having it as and connecting everything to this one major thing throughout the book would be much better than what I originally had in store. Now, you won't know any of this at all, but in my head, that's how it's going to work, and that means that until that happens, I won't feel like this book is finished. I don't even know whether I'll feel like this book is finished until it's in my hands. And people keep saying, is this book taking a while because it's the final book? And yes, that is the case. And it's the case of wanting to do these characters justice, wanting to do the story that I'm doing justice, but also because I've taken on more of a huge undertaking. This is more of a huge undertaking for me, is what I'm trying to say, because it is the most plot heavy of the Doris books. This is not a book in which we have 10 separate monologues, each having a different topic. I'm not making it in an episodic fashion as I have done previously. I have written this and I'm going to have to go back, and I know I edit as I go along, but still in my head it is very much, again, the metaphor that all writers use. It's very much clay to be moulded, and that is how I feel about that first part. The second part, which I can't give any details for, but of which the final chapter made my mother cry, still proud of that, I feel is the most well done. And it was when I finished that second part that I recognised to go back and change the first, because I want it to be just as strong as that second part. And writing this third and final part, everything in it is related to throwaway lines from the first, sorry, I was checking my handbrake, from the first Doris book. And I'm also trying to steer clear of violence, because at the end of the first Doris book we have something violent happen, and in the second book we had it happen as well. I think I avoided it in Doris Ahoy, the novella, that was originally going to be the beginning of this book. But can you imagine that? Waiting nearly 5 years for the final Doris book. Well, I mean, technically, you have still been waiting nearly 5 years for the final Doris book from when Indisputably Doris came out. But what was I saying? I didn't want any violence because I think that Doris has grown as a character, and I think that Doris's growth as a character is very heavy in this book. This book is more novel shaped, and it was a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge. But I think that whenever we're doing something artistic, we need to strive to challenge ourselves more. And so I know, and I keep saying it because someone got in touch with me asking me when the next Alice Valentine book was coming out. And trust me, after the final Doris book, the next book to come out will be the second Alice Valentine book, title to be confirmed. But between Doris and Alice, I want to write something else, something standalone. And I don't plan on working on it for long. I don't know when I'll release it. but I just need to take a break from writing a series. And the book that I have planned to write is a book that I have been planning for by the time I finish Doris, it's going to be about 8 years. Similarly, there's another book that I've been planning for 8 years, but that's not going to be getting written for quite a while, and I'm still questioning whether to take aspects of that and include it in the Alice books instead, so we will see. A Prior Commitment, which is a novella I teased 2 years ago, is still not written, and the first ever draft of that was really written in 2014. So I've got a lot of projects that I could return to, but we will see. Currently, writing is taking up a lot of my spare time, as is walking the dog, which I was not able to do much of this week. Don't worry, she still got exercised. I just kept throwing her in the garden with my brother's dogs and watching her run about like a madden. And also, films. I asked for film recommendations on Instagram, and it worked really well. I'm incredibly grateful, because I wanted to watch 52 films this year, because film is a media that I don't watch enough of, and because I've always felt like, oh, I'm wasting my time by doing this, I should be writing instead, or I should be reading something, and I decided that I wanted to make time for cinema and films, and so I just sent this message out, or this story on Instagram, and so many people got in touch that I now have enough to get through 52 films. So hopefully, I need to catch up. I'm currently about 6 films behind, but if I try and watch 2 films a week, which I think I have time for, I think I can probably find the 3 or 4 hours necessary for that per week, then I can do it, and I can start exploring an avenue of media that I have long maligned. I didn't think I'd have much to talk about. I chose 3 things, and I've got through quite a fair bit of time there. So what I'm going to do now is go in. I can't really go into the shop. I always say here till 5, then I'll go home, then I've got tomorrow off. I don't know what else there is to talk about. I mentioned reading and writing. Oh, well, if we're talking about cinema, then I finally watched Death Becomes Her. I wanted to watch that after watching the Jinx Monsoon documentary Drag Becomes Him, and this cost money to watch on a certain online streaming platform that I will not mention, but on Netflix it was available on Netflix, so I finally watched that, and I was impressed. I was in hysterics. I was laughing so hard that Sally came over to check what was wrong. And then that same night I chose to watch Clue, which is the American version of Cluedo. It was turned into a film. I believe this came out in 1985. It has Tim Curry and the guy who was in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And I had already seen Family Guy's episode, and then there were fewer. Therefore, I knew how this was going to turn out, because unfortunately that episode is a spoof of Clue, which I didn't know. But it was still an all-right murder mystery. I can understand why it has something of a cult status now, but I don't know whether I'd watch it again. Unlike Death Becomes Her, because I could watch that film again. I won't lie, I watched it on 1.5 speed, and you shouldn't do that with a film because it's been shot in a certain type of way to get certain reactions at certain times, but I did enjoy it. And that's me done. If I have mentioned anything that you want to talk about, please feel free to discuss it in the comments. I actually would like some answers with regards to that whole non-fiction, fiction, historical question I asked at the start of this video. Again, if you'd like to support a failing writer and acquire one of his books, then please do so. I will leave a link to my website. However, if you wanted to get in touch with me in any of the other places to see about getting copies sent your way, then I will also leave links to my email address, my Twitter, although I'm trying to avoid Twitter because sometimes it can seem like a cesspit of doom, and Instagram, which only exists to make people feel bad about themselves, but they're all there, so feel free to get in touch with me through any one of those mediums. I hope that you got something out of this video, even if it was sheer boredom, even if it was just something to listen to whilst you're in the bath, and until next time, that is all.